Welcome to Giant Talk, everyone, the world's first OKR podcast in partnership with the guys over at Koan. Today, as you can tell, Lawrence is in the hot seat, so he'll be answering questions rather than hosting. So you've got me, Jenny, hosting today's episode. And we're going to be talking about a really fascinating topic today about OKRs as a network and not a hierarchy. But before we just kick off, I just wanted to note that if you've got any questions during the session, please pop them in the chat and then we'll try and answer as many as possible live as we can. So to kick us off, I'm just going to ask for some introductions, please. I'll come to you first, Lawrence, and then to you, Matt. So, Lawrence.
Thanks, Jen. So, hopefully most people know me already if they've listened to any of the podcasts before. I have been hosting it for about 18 months now. If this happens to be your first time listening to one of our podcasts, I'm Lawrence. I work for Derby Giants, head of OKR projects, been with the business a couple of years now, 2.5 years, something like that. And, we are an OKR consultancy based in the UK, but powering OKRs around the world. So helping companies to embed OKRs in the right way for them. And I lead on most of those projects here at Derby Giants. So that's me.
Great. Thanks, Lawrence. And Matt?
Hey, everybody. This is Matt Tucker. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Koan. Thrilled, as always, to join for these podcasts. We love working with the Derby Giants team. We provide software to help companies with their strategic and operational cadence. And, of course, one critical component of that is helping companies manage OKRs at scale from teams all the way up to company-wide implementations. And very excited for this topic today.
Great. Thanks, Matt. So as we're all excited about it, let's dive straight in, I guess. So Lawrence, I'm going to come to you first. So when we say a network of OKRs, what do you mean by this?
Yeah, okay. So good place to start, I suppose, as any. The picture that I want people to get into their minds right from the beginning of this podcast as we're talking about this topic is that of a web, really, a web of OKRs that connect at different points and connect in different directions. So rather than a traditional waterfall or pyramid that you might have seen from outcome-based objective setting frameworks before, it's this web or network of OKRs building out from a core central principle, a core central strategy for the business that I want people to kind of be thinking about. And it's a really important differentiation because it will change your mindset and the whole company's mindset about OKRs as soon as you start thinking of them in this way, as we're going to come on to later.
Okay, so that's how we want people to think about OKRs. So I suppose, Matt, how does this compare to kind of how you've traditionally seen OKRs set up?
Yeah, exactly. There's this initial, when you initially approach OKRs, maybe an instinct even to treat it more like a tree structure where you have this kind of perfectly drawn map, starting with the company level or organization level objectives and key results. And then there's even a lot of examples out there that kind of make you think that this is the right way to do it. But you do something like take the key result from those company level objectives, and then you turn that into objectives at the departmental level. And then you take the key results there and you turn that into objectives at the team level. And it's this entirely top-down process of setting goals, where essentially every team and every individual is dictated like, here's exactly what you're supposed to do. I'm telling you exactly what your goals are.
You're making my stomach turn just saying it, Matt.
I know, it's horrible.
It is. It's awful. It's awful.
So when you talk about that structure of kind of an organization, then would you say that OKR should be mapped onto the organizational chart? And I'll come to you on Lawrence on that one.
You go for it, Matt.
That's a good question. I think very, very often OKRs do align relatively well to organizational structure. And in particular, there's this opportunity to, when you're doing it the right way, really to use OKRs as a way of actually providing autonomy down at the team level. Now, one of the reasons why a network, though, is so important is so many efforts, especially when they're strategic, end up being very cross-functional. And so you might have multiple teams working on them. You have a lot of collaboration between departments. If you define big objectives that you're trying to achieve as an organization, it is gonna cross a lot of boundaries. Now, ultimately, we're big fans of goals really kicking in down at the team level, and that is going to map to your organization. But this is where the network comes in, because in reality, things get messy, and there's not perfect lines that would exactly match your reporting structure.
Yeah, and I guess kind of like you say, every organization's different, so every kind of network looks slightly different, I guess.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jen. To be honest, every organization's different. They have a different organizational structure, and so even if you were mapping them against the org chart, they would be slightly different, I suppose. But you would still find this kind of tree or pyramid approach that Matt alluded to, where somebody's key results become the objectives at the next level down. And the big problem with this and mapping them onto the org chart in this way is that you're going to run into two problems. The first of which is OKRs are going to end up being created for the sake of it. So, there are OKRs at the layer above. So I feel like I've got to create OKRs for my subordinates or my direct reports below me. And when you get into that realm of thinking, you kind of end up with just hundreds of OKRs that have no strategical focus or strategical relevance whatsoever. They become to-do lists, basically. You will see the shift in them from very outcome-focused at the top level to very output-focused at the bottom level. So that's health warning number one. Health warning number two, really, is that you're going to end up with OKRs not being owned by the most strategically relevant people in the business. So when something's in the spotlight with an OKR, no matter what level level in the business it's set at, that doesn't mean that somebody lower down in the business isn't the most relevant person to report on that data and take accountability for that OKR, which means you're missing out on not only empowering your staff further down the OKR chart, but you're also just creating a lot more work for the guys at the top that, if the right culture was there and if you were thinking of this network rather than an OKR, that work could have been handed down and could have been dissipated further throughout the team. So the senior guys are creating a rod for their own back just by trying to make OKRs stick to the hierarchy or the OKR chart.
Okay, so from what you're saying, it makes it sound like someone could own an OKR, but then potentially have a team that works on that OKR and they don't necessarily do the OKR, if that makes sense. So they kind of own the objective and the key result, but then they have other people working to it as well. So like you say, a network rather than just a hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly that.
Great stuff. So Matt, we obviously know there's lots of tools out there, but how can a tool kind of help to maintain a network of OKRs and rather than slip into this hierarchical approach?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And I wanted to add one, sort of a trap, or I guess I think this is like the warning sign. It's how you know that you've ended up with a tree rather than a network, which is there's always, this is one of the first things that we'll look for. If you have this practice of saying, hey, look, everything that everybody's working on across the entire company has to perfectly ladder up into the company level objectives, you end up with just a ton of OKRs, very often hundreds, even in relatively small organizations. And there always ends up being this instinct to add a kind of generic OKR right up at the company level, which is something like be a better company or operational excellence, or something like that, because it ends up being this conundrum, like, oh my God, everything that everyone in the company is doing has to line up to the top level company objective, and therefore we're just going to create a generic catch-all. so that we can have this perfect tree structure. And that really is another kind of smell of losing strategic focus and not missing the opportunity to really define the outcomes that will move the business in a really big way. From a tooling perspective, there are a few things that can get especially challenging with trying to manage your OKRs manually and create a great network. I think one of the most obvious ones is those cross-functional OKRs. So a really traditional way of tracking OKRs, and by the way, it can still work. It's better than nothing. But you create a spreadsheet or a Google sheet, and every team, each department ends up getting a different sheet. Each team ends up getting a different sheet. But one of the big challenges with that approach is how do you model cross-functional OKRs in that world? You end up really just having to copy the goals between multiple different teams, or forcing it into more of a tree structure and not creating that network effect where you can have the best people working towards the most strategic outcomes, and it just gets to be a mess to track and to figure out what's actually going on.
And from your point of view, Lawrence, as an OKR consultant, I'm guessing you would think the similar with a tool compared to kind of your spreadsheets.
100%, yeah. Matt's really hit the nail on the head here, that doing it as a network is slightly more complicated. It's a million times more impactful, but it's slightly more complicated because it requires the right mindset and the right culture and what have you. But two things are going to be more important than ever, two of the principles of OKRs, which is that transparency is paramount. Because if you aren't expecting to look at a tree of OKRs and be able to see exactly where you fit in that tree, or where your team fits in that tree, in line with what you've always expected in the past, and what matches your company organizational structure, then you need to be able to really quickly find your place, find your objectives, find your key results. And that becomes really difficult to do, as Matt said, if you don't have an easy to use system that's easy to utilize. And you can use the filters, you can use the alignment views and that sort of thing. And then the other thing is the dependencies change. So no longer are you solely dependent on your work, your colleagues' work, and either your direct report work or your manager work, depending on where you are in the tree. But because it's so cross-functional, there are going to be dependencies in all sorts of different places in the organization. And with that in mind, again, you're going to have to be able to have full visibility of these. And Matt touched on it there. If people are working to different sheets, even if it's on the same spreadsheet, I've seen spreadsheets with hundreds of tabs at the bottom for different teams in different periods and different cycles. You've just got no chance if you're going to make it work with this network view rather than hierarchy view. So some sort of software has to come into play at this point.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. And I think we've already touched on this, but I suppose it's what's the result? I guess what goes wrong when OKRs are used as a hierarchy? What happens to the teams and the organisation? And I'll come to you, Matt, on that one, please.
Yeah, maybe I'll touch on 2 points. I think we could probably riff on this topic for a bit. But one of the let's just assume a top-down, fully top-down OKR implementation. One of the most important ideas behind OKRs is this idea of you of course have the objective as well as the key results, and the reason in particular you write down an objective is you want to imbue work with purpose and meaning, and make it clear why are we chasing these numbers. And it's not just about growing new revenue to $10 million, for example. We're trying to do that, and that might be a way that we're measuring some specific impact we're trying to have as a business. So let's just play this out for a second. And so maybe you have an objective of accelerate growth for the business by creating more business in the APAC Asia region. And one of those key results is 10 million of new business. So the classic fully top-down mechanic, if you were doing this in sales, might be then, all right, great for each of the regions, and we're going to take that $10 million overall number, and now we're going to make an objective of $5 million for one part of the sales organization and another $2.5 million for another. And then now suddenly, if that's your objective, you're going to create a whole set of activities as the key results there that are going to be how we do it. And suddenly, if you're a couple layers down, you've lost the entire ability to understand the purpose of what you were doing and the context for it. Instead of OKRs being a way of empowering employees by making their work more purposeful and giving clarity to why we're trying to achieve these goals as an objective, you suddenly just have a set of KPIs essentially with to-do lists under that. So that I would hold out as one of the things that you can run into is just losing as you walk down further and further down the tree, losing the ability to understand, well, why are we actually trying to achieve this? And then part two, very related, losing the autonomy as you work further down in the organization and where some of the most impact might actually happen. If you're being told exactly what the goals are, without any flexibility, and you have no opportunity to simultaneously bottom up, understand the high level direction, and then propose your own goals and ways of measuring that, and you lose autonomy and purpose in your work.
Great, thanks, Matt. Lawrence, did you want to add anything further to that?
Only that it's fantastic points that Matt's making there, and I'm not going to try and add anything to that because he's encapsulated it so well. But what can go wrong when using them as a hierarchy, even just from a simple admin point of view, is that people will often end up feeling like if you're using OKRs in a hierarchy, you need to create OKRs at every level of that hierarchy and for every person in that hierarchy. And okay, people listening to this might think, yeah, that makes sense, but that's what we would do. But if you think about what that means, actually, on a practical level, if you follow the best practice recommendation of 3 to 4 OKRs at every sort of node in the business where OKRs are going to exist, and 3 to 4 key results per each objective, then you're going to end up with having to try to align at a very minimum, say in a business of 500 people, a very minimum of 2,000 OKRs every quarter, and therefore 7,000 to 8,000 key results every quarter.
Wow.
Yeah, and it becomes more industry than it is value. Anybody that's trying to implement OKRs and has seen that happen, I'm sure is nodding their head right now, because it is a monumental task. And it becomes more effort than it's worth. And you are going to lose the buy-in from the staff because they don't see it as valuable. It's going to feel like a micromanagement exercise from the senior team to be able to really closely follow what people are working on all the time. And as Matt correctly alluded to, it just loses all of that purposefulness that you would achieve if you were doing them in a network of strategical priorities rather than trying to cascade these things down.
Lawrence, I think you've hit on a really important point here, which is just the sheer complexity that can come out of trying to have that fully top-down model. And purely the number of goals you end up with, I think that's a really important criteria to look for. And I'm sure you run into this even more than we do, but I can't tell you the number of times we have to start up a conversation with, you have way too many goals. But there's one other aspect to the complexity I think that you were alluding to as well, which is your planning process when it's a fully top-down hierarchical goals setup is going to be really complicated and long as well. Because if you are trying to create alignment that way, not only are you dealing with just a ton of goals at every level, but you're also having to set goals at one level before you can set goals at the next level. And so, if you're kind of taking this to its logical conclusion and you have, 4 layers of hierarchy in your business, that's going to be a very long planning process of setting them at each level, and that being essentially a hard stop gate before you can work your way down to the next level. And we've certainly seen implementations where people spend a month and a half in the planning cycle. And so, there's just this feeling of we're just perpetually planning and never actually executing on our strategy.
Yeah. And these things are supposed to be lean and agile, right? That's the whole point. And it's so easy to get trapped in that vortex of never-ending planning, Matt. You're absolutely right.
I think from both what you're both saying as well, I think it's obviously definitely sound. No, I was going to say, I think from what you're both saying, I think it sounds like it can be extremely damaging culturally wise in the organisation as well. So I think that's just something to pick up on from what you've both kind of pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jen, you've worked with us for a long time now, and we're all about empowerment of staff and providing them with a direction and letting them decide how they're going to achieve it. This is the outcome we want. We hired you because you're intelligent staff. We trust you. Go away and make it happen. This hierarchical view changes that. It changes it, even if you don't mean it to. You've got to be careful because it changes it in the mindset of the staff of this is my manager's objectives and key results. Therefore, I must do something that aligns into that. Or I've seen even worse things like that, where say a manager has a key result of achieving 20 new customers in Europe, and he has 4 members of staff, and each of them have had to take 5 key results. And there's nothing empowering about that. It's nothing empowering whatsoever. That is just killing off so many of the principles of OKRs straight away. But as businesses get into this hierarchical way of doing them, sometimes that's all they're left with to assign to their staff, or to allow their staff to even collaborate on, because they're going down this hierarchical path, and there's nothing of strategical relevance left to assign them OKRs on.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know whether you wanted to add something further to that, Matt.
I think when I hear someone say, "I hate OKRs," it's very often because they've worked in an environment where essentially OKRs process was implemented this way, and there is just a ton of complexity, not a lot of autonomy, not a lot of strategic impact, and the worst of all worlds. The level of effort that you put into the business process is much less than the value that you get out of it. And so, what we want to look for instead is a way of using OKRs to create autonomy, to ensure that we're imbuing work with purpose, and to keep the process as simple and lean and agile as possible. So you're getting massively more value out of it than the effort that you're putting in.
So I love how Koan is designed with the team in mind. The team is really at the centre of the system, and it's about helping the team and the members of those teams, obviously, to really collaborate on how they work with OKRs. I mean, there's obviously full transparency across the system, which helps, and then the features that they have around feedback and being able to track levels of confidence and so on and so forth around, and progress against OKRs. It's amazing, and because of that level of transparency, it builds accountability and fosters some great communication. So yeah, I love how teams are just at the centre of the system.
I want to shift the conversation a little bit, but it's still something to talk about within this realm. Something that we hear, and a term we hear of very regularly, is cascading OKRs. And I know, Lawrence, this makes you slightly nervous, so I just wanted to ask why this was, really.
Yeah, cascading OKRs is one of the most frequent terms you'll come across if you Google it or read any of the books or whatever, because what they actually mean is aligning OKRs. But cascading OKRs is exactly what Matt and I have been talking about here, where, somebody's key results become the next person's objectives, become the next person's key results, and so on and so forth. it's not to be confused for alignment, which is what I think most people are actually alluding to when they use the term cascading OKRs, i.e., everybody should be setting their focus on the common goal. We're all trying to achieve the same thing. These things that are in the spotlight, everybody's work should be aligning into making progress on those and moving the needle on those key results. But that's very different to cascading. And that can be done through an alignment, through a network approach rather than a cascading approach.
Great. We've actually had a question in from Mappit actually about kind of the hierarchy approach. And they say they're in the third OKR cycle and they are exactly in a hierarchy. So how do they unravel a hierarchy and transfer it into a network? It seems like detail is part of our culture.
Yeah, so great question. And I think it's 3 main points to note, which is there enough collaboration and cross-functionality going on between teams? So are teams and departments coming together to discuss the OKRs that are being set? Because that's how you create that sort of horizontal network approach at first, rather than just cascading a hierarchy straight down. And then it's the question that's being asked once an OKR is written of who should own the OKR. So don't always think that somebody at a lower level can't own an objective that's higher up what you would call the traditional hierarchy. So, start to play around with who is owning what, where. And then the third question is, are you setting OKRs that have lost their strategical relevance? Are they just, I have to get these numbers because my boss's numbers are these ones above and I have to do my fair share of them? Or do they still have strategical relevance to them? If they're feeling a bit to-do listy, if they're feeling a bit, output focused rather than outcome focused or business as usual focused, then it sounds like you're in this hierarchy view rather than the network view. And it's worth saying on that point as well that because it's a network, different OKRs can have a different number of supporting OKRs or a different number of aligned OKRs, because it should stop, like I say, where the strategical relevance ends. And if that means for one core OKR, it has 2 layers of OKRs aligned into it, then great. If for another one, it's 3 layers, fantastic. If they're all still strategically relevant outcome-focused OKRs. Or maybe on one of the OKRs, you think, actually, you know what, this is fine just to leave at a core level. We know what we need to do to work on it. If we write anything under this, it'll just be a to-do list, and therefore it doesn't need OKRs under it. That's fine because it's a network, and networks and webs spread out at different rates, depending on where they are and how much detail needs to align in underneath it.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. I think that answered Mappit's question really well, and it's something that we wanted to speak about anyway. Was about kind of how businesses approach doing this differently. So, Matt, I just thought I'd come to yourself now, as well as Lawrence has kind of already answered Mappit's question slightly on that.
Yeah, and I love that very specific point around thinking about not every top level company objective does need the same number of layers below it. I think that test that you propose, Lawrence, of only take it down as far as their strategic relevance is a really good one. One of the pieces of advice we often find that we're offering our customers is, all right, with your OKRs methodology, one concept you might need to let go of that might be difficult at first, and especially if you've been coming from a practice where you do have this strict hierarchy, is letting go of the assumption that everyone's work all day long needs to be tied to a goal somewhere. In other words, if you feel like all the work that we're doing in the entire company has to be connected to a goal somehow, otherwise we can't measure the progress. If you do that, it's going to be really hard to not end up with way too many goals and to not end up with something that ends up looking like a strict hierarchy. And there's a lot of different approaches. I'd be really interested if you, Lawrence, have a set of heuristics that you recommend to your clients. But I think the reality in most businesses is that the focus area of where there needs to be strategic impact can actually move around from quarter to quarter. In one quarter, it might be needing to deliver a massive product innovation. Another quarter, it might be needing to completely retool and rebuild the way that customer support happens. And there's probably going to be a lot of opportunities for different parts of the organization to make impact to that top level strategic initiative and outcome that you're trying to achieve. But based on who you are in the company, it might be a different percentage. Your job might be 100% focused towards a goal, or maybe you're 50-50. Half of your work is kind of keeping the lights on work or business as usual work, and then 50% is towards a goal. And all that's okay. And if you adopt a network approach and really think about your OKRs as the opportunity to change the way that the business is functioning, you can let go of that pressure of everybody needs to have goals, and every single thing that we're working on needs to be measured with a goal.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, you're spot on there, Matt. Just sorry, Jen, just to touch on that quickly. You're right. It's two OKR myths that need debunking in there. First of all, the one that you mentioned, Matt, which is that everybody needs an OKR, which is just utter nonsense, as you touched on. The second one is that OKRs are a replacement for KPIs. OKRs are not a replacement for KPIs. These two things have to live very harmoniously together. KPIs are really what are telling you if you're going to keep the lights on, as Matt said. So if your work is mostly around keeping the lights on, it's absolutely fine for it to remain being measured by KPIs. However, that also doesn't mean that a KPI can never become an OKR. I mean, key results are measures, they're metrics at the end of the day, as are KPIs. So it makes sense that key results are going to lean on KPIs from time to time. And what it basically means is if you've got a business as usual role or a day-to-day role that suddenly takes an alarming dip where the KPI is concerned, let's take customer feedback, for example. If you, for years and years on end, maintain a customer feedback score of 95%, then you don't need an OKR on it because you're already really bloody good at it. OKRs should be looking to grow results. But say it suddenly drops to 85% or 75%, that KPI, that customer feedback score, then it might be slightly alarming. And that's when you might want to bring that KPI that up until this point has been day-to-day business as usual work into an OKR, because you're asking the question, what are we going to do to focus our attention onto resolving this problem, getting this KPI back up to a healthy level. But once it's solved and you're getting good traction with it again, take it back out, let it become a health metric again, a KPI, and use your OKRs, the limited resource of OKRs, to shine the spotlight, to dedicate that focus elsewhere. And that's how you end up with what Matt was saying of the scope changing and the spotlight moving across the stage of where people's focus needs to be drawn.
I love that advice. And there's perhaps a danger when we use the word business as usual, and that making it sound like that's not important. To your point, there may be centers of excellence in the business where you're maintaining very high level KPIs and health metrics, but you're just executing month after month, doing that as a business. It's a highly tuned machine. I think you're exactly right. Like that's a perfect example of where a health metric or KPI is a great way of ensuring that you're maintaining that high level. And you might call that business as usual, but that can be business excellence. As opposed to the OKR, which is, hey, we really need to craft and define and make clear a change that needs to be made. Because I like your spotlight analogy. This is where we need to shine and focus and achieve a breakthrough.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks both. I think we've obviously spoke about kind of why the network is better than the hierarchical approach. And there's obviously multiple tools out there, but I just wondered whether there was any kind of tools that were available to kind of help with this approach. And I'll come to you, I suppose, Lawrence, first on this one.
Yeah, so remote working, doing these setups remotely with our clients has driven us to have to find some tools, to be honest. And one of the best ones we've come across is a tool called Group Map. Others are out there. But basically what you're looking to do is use any sort of like traditional mind mapping software where you can create these OKRs from a middle point outwards. If you use flowchart software, then you're going to end up automatically going into these functional hierarchies, just subconsciously. It's the way you're going to think about it. But with mind mapping, you can build the connections, and you can't just put people in, to where they fit, depending on what layer of the business they're in, because that's not how mind mapping works. Mind mapping helps you to create a web. So I'd recommend checking out Group Map. It's a fantastic way of doing it collaboratively with your employees. But really that mind map approach is what to think about.
Yeah, I think obviously we've set our OKRs internally, and Group Map's something we've used. And I know in terms of the collaboration and being able to use it separately at different times and add things in really helps with that network approach. So
100%, yeah.
Yeah. So Matt, anything you wanted to kind of add there, the tools that can help people with this approach?
Yeah, I was going to touch on also just a little bit of the detail of the process. We spent a lot of time talking today about don't do this. Oh my God, you'll fall into this trap. But there's the obvious question: well, what do we do instead? I think the Group Map recommendation is great from a planning perspective and thinking about this, as a mind map, not a flow chart. One of the other things to just think through as well is, we often talk about this simultaneous top-down and bottom-up process of setting goals. And I think that's another way of thinking about how to tackle this problem, which is, you'll define a planning period, and defining that planning period to being relatively short, we think is a great idea. You don't want to let it drag out week after week after week. And if you are keeping this lightweight and truly focused on the most important objectives and outcomes you're trying to achieve as an organization, you should be able to get through that process pretty quickly, especially if you've made the investment in clearly defining your company mission and vision and strategy and yearly objectives when you go into that quarterly planning process. So some of the advice we love giving is have some really specific, have a really specific playbook about when you enter the planning process and when you will finish it, and some of the feedback loops inside. And then, there's definitely this process, the company level objectives and outcomes where you do define those, and that's a really good starting point for the whole organization. And doing some of that mind mapping exercise is a great way of kind of exploring how that can tendril into various parts of the organization. But then there can also be a simultaneous bottom-up process where teams can be proposing goals and finding some opportunities to collaborate cross-functionally, knowing those top-level outcomes that have already been defined at the company level, and then create feedback loops. And that will help to make sure that the planning process doesn't drag on and on and on, because now you don't have to go from one level to another to another to another. And you can have everybody kind of defining the goals and having feedback in this window of time. So that's what we usually mean by bottom up, as well as top down goal setting, but having a relatively narrow window to do your planning in can really help to ensure that things stay simple too.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Be strict on those deadlines and keep to them, because otherwise it will drag on for months. And again, it will go back to what we said earlier. It will become more planning than it is execution.
It sounds like from what you're saying as well, it's very important in terms of the feedback/communication kind of check-ins as well are all really important to this network approach rather than this hierarchical approach. And And I know with us, our check-ins are very much the whole team, so that kind of lends itself to the network approach. And I understand that's not as easy to do in bigger organizations, but it seems like that would be really important as well. Okay.
Exactly.
So we've obviously spoke a lot today about kind of why the network approach, like you say, Matt, and we've kind of said, don't do this, don't do that. But kind of, is there a shift in mindset that needs to take place for an organization to be able to follow the kind of network route, I guess?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a lot of these things, but one more thing to add to that, which is being clear organizationally. Why are we doing OKRs and what do we hope to get out of them? It can actually be pretty important to set that context and to remind yourselves as a team why we're doing this. In particular, just to state very clearly, we're not embracing OKRs and our goal setting methodology as a way of micromanaging everyone in the organization, especially in the new world we find ourselves in, where we are at the very least temporarily remotely working, in many cases now much more permanently remotely working. It's more important than ever to, as Lauren said, like, trust the people that you've hired, know that you've hired smart people, and give them the tools to do their best work imbued with purpose. And if you start and you kind of tell yourselves almost as a mantra, like, this is why we've embraced OKRs, in order to make sure that we can shine a light on what's most important, to keep things simpler, to give an opportunity for everyone in the organization to make massive impact and to know why their work matters. That's just a good, almost philosophical place to start with. And then as you start to work through the details and write down your goals process in the playbook and think through those planning exercises, you can come back to those principles and kind of check yourself if things are getting too complicated or you find yourself with a goal that really is more of a to-do list and not strategic. You can throw it away and go back to something a little simpler.
Yeah, if I can kind of just touch on this point about mindset as well. There are, as I see it, 2 or 3 key areas that have to be adopted in the business for this to work. And again, I'm going to start with a bit of a health warning of where I've seen it really, really not work, and where the hierarchy approach is instilled. And it's where there's actually concerns around managerial safety, i.e. the managers want to own the top level OKRs because they're scared that if somebody below them owns them, they will be seen as not useful to the company or not relevant to the company. So they almost try and hoard the top level decisions to make themselves look important and valuable to the company, whereas really, they're there to provide the direction and expertise and support everybody throughout the business. So if you're concerned that that's going on in the business and that there might be that impact, there might be some culture and practice work, culture and values work we need to do with your top team. And that leads into psychological safety, which is the fear of failure, and that means that these guys who were going to ask to take on objectives and key results, a level that might traditionally be seen as higher than where they're at in the org chart, they have to be encouraged and they've got to be supported. And if they take a high level responsibility and it goes a little bit wrong, everybody in the business has to support them and take the lessons from it, not be immediately sort of chastising them. Otherwise, you're never going to have anybody willing to stand up and take responsibility again. So it's about that supportive atmosphere rather than what's the word I'm looking for? Rather than using it as an opportunity to kind of expectantly have people fail.
Yeah, I think that psychological safety point's a really good one, especially in the current climate where people are working from home and they kind of haven't got the reassurance necessarily of being in the office and being able to bounce ideas and that kind of thing. So
yeah, and even, just job safety is a concern for a lot of people right now.
Definitely.
One very practical tip, just to riff on that, because I really love that point, Lawrence, is one sure way of killing the ability to create that psychological safety and spirit of risk taking and embracing stretch results is to tie your OKRs explicitly to the performance management process.
Yeah.
If people know the way I'm going to get promoted and the way that I'm going to receive compensation is directly tied to goal achievement, well, everyone's going to demand having goals. Everyone's going to demand kind of lowering the bar on those goals as much as possible, and it's going to go right back to almost automatically that hierarchical goal approach.
Yeah, of course.
And I think just to add to that, Matt, I think obviously people will want goals, but then you have something happen like's happened this year with the worldwide pandemic, and it's kind of out of your hands completely where some of your goals will be affected. So I agree. I think it kind of, you need to be more secure in your mindset and in your workplace to be able to excel, really.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we've kind of come to the end of our discussion. So I just wanted to come to you guys on any kind of final thoughts around the kind of network approach. And I'll come to you, Lawrence, first, and then come to you, Matt, if that's okay.
Sure. So, it's going to be different for different businesses how quickly they can implement this and grow to this network. And it's okay for it to be a journey. We're asking big things here, especially of organizations over 150, 200 people. We're asking for a big change and a big mindset change. All we're saying is that we promise you the rewards will be worth it once you've gone through this journey. But just pick a starting place and give it a go. Whether that is allowing one or two people to step up and own higher level goals, or it's creating more cross functionality in the business. Just have a go and see how it works and take the learning from it. If it all goes wrong, don't get disheartened, look into what went wrong and what you could do differently next time, and just learn and move on that journey as you go.
And I absolutely agree with that journey. And, as part of that evolution, and in every case, look for the opportunity to simplify. If you are stuck in this hierarchical process, as we talked about, you're probably in an environment where there are just way too many goals, and where it's a mix of to-dos and tactical work, mixed in with the actual strategic outcomes you're trying to achieve. And so part of how you can take your organization on this journey is just to look for those opportunities for radical simplification and write down less goals. You'll force some of those conversations around cross-functional goals, and if there's less things that we say are important, now you're going to have more discussions about the network in the organization that will achieve them.
Yeah, absolutely. Here.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to finish our conversation today. So just wanted to thank you both, obviously, for joining us for that chat about network and not a hierarchy approach to OKRs. We hope everyone enjoyed today's episode of Giant Talk, and if you did, we'd love you to go to your podcast provider of choice and give us preferably a 5-star review. That would be lovely. And we look forward and we look forward to you joining us for future episodes of Giant Talk. This will be available as an episode on our channel as well if you couldn't join us for the live. And finally, just stay safe, and thanks for listening. Thanks guys.
Jenny. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers, Matt. Bye.